Mine are. Mike? Mike. Okay. Today, I'm not Mike. I'm Jim Grumbach. I tried that a couple of weeks ago. Nobody laughed, so I guess we're getting better. I am a member of your parish committee. Bobby, can you hear me? You can't. Well, come on up here. We're glad you are here in person, online, and joining us in our beautiful sanctuary. I have two special welcomes today. First is to visitors. We are always happy to see visitors here. And secondly, many of the participants today attended last night's auction. It was great to see you. It was great to all be together and to develop more fellowship. After the service, we invite you to join us downstairs or online for community time following the service. Our mission is to build community, search for meaning, deepen our spirituality, and make a better world. If you have questions about First Parish or Unitarian Universalism, somebody from our membership team will be at the welcome table during coffee hour to greet you and answer any questions. Reverend Deborah and Kate Holland, our Director of Lifespan Education, are also available after the service and would love to meet with you. A big thanks to all other service participants whose names are in the order of service. Please remember to silence your cell phones for our time together. Please join me now in taking a moment to say hello to one another. Wave to the front camera and those online.
Hello. Hello.
A heartfelt welcome to all. Let us now turn our hearts and minds to worship.
It rained last night. We think this is an appropriate song for the end of this month.
Pedro, el fim do caminho, el resto te toca, el pouco sozinho. A stick, a stone, it's the end of the road. It's feeling alone, it's the weight of your load. It's a sliver of glass, it's life, it's the sun. It's night, it's death, it's a knife, it's a gun. A flower that blooms, a fox in the brush, a knot in the wood, the song of the thrush, the mystery of life, the steps in the hall, the sound of the wind and the waterfall. It's the moon floating free, it's the curve of the slope, it's an ant, it's a bee, it's a reason for hope. And the riverbank sings of the waters of March. It's the promise of spring, it's the joy in your heart. e pa, e pedra, il fim de caminho. El hester ci toca, el pouco sozinho. Em cobra, em pó, e Joel, José. Em espino no mal, e cochino pé. A sigh of breath, a walk, a run, a life, a death, a ray in the sun, and the riverbank sings of the waters of March. It's the promise of life, it's the joy in your heart. Epa, e pedra, el fim de caminho. El hester ci toca, el pouco sozinho. A stick, a stone, it's the end of the road. The stump of a tree, it's a frog, it's a toad. It's the moon floating free, it's the curve of the slope. It's an ant, it's a bee, it's the reason for hope. And the riverbank sings of the waters of March. It's the promise of spring, it's the joy in your heart.
Here we go. Thank you, Emily and Matthew. And it is the promise of spring. Despite the weather, my calendar tells me spring has officially begun. Yay. Yeah? Yay. The sun has now crossed north over the equator, and here in the northern hemisphere, that means warmer weather, longer days, and flowers. And last night's Mediterranean Magic Party was a great way to kick off the spring season and to celebrate community. Oh, by the way, I'm Reverend Deborah Bennett, for those of you that don't know me. It's good to be with you this morning. I'm still on my Mediterranean Magic high. It was so fun last night. I want to give a special shout out to those of you that were there, and especially the auction committee who put in such an amazing amount of work. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who contributed, both in terms of food, the drink, everything was amazing. The setup, the cleanup, I mean, it just all came together so beautifully. And all those that bid, whether you got your prizes or not, thank you so very much. I have fresh off the presses, the preliminary tally for last evening's auction was $29,500. I'm thinking a monthly auction and we'll be all set. Won't have to pass the plate anymore. This is from Barb Hefner, who says, bear in mind that's the gross. There will be expenses, so they're going to have the grand tally will come out in a few days. But thanks to everyone who donated. Also, very soon in our emails, those of you on the email list will receive a link to photos. Our own beloved Brad Keyes was out there snapping photos, so we'll get to see lots of that. Also, there is leftover decor in the sunroom, so if you'd like to take a little Mediterranean magic home for yourself, check that out during coffee hour. So thank you all. As many of you know, today is also the day in the Christian tradition known as Palm Sunday. According to the Gospels, Jesus Christ rode into Jerusalem on a donkey on this day, 6 days before the resurrection. People are said to have lined the streets and laid down their coats and small branches of trees in front of him singing. The donkey is said to symbolize the arrival of peace. And indeed, this world could use a whole lot more peace right now. So whether that is our tradition or not, I think it is a worthy day to just take a moment and pause and pray for peace in our world. One way that we as Unitarian Universalists seek to create peace in the world is by embracing and celebrating diversity. And so this morning I'm going to begin with this poem by Alexis Engelbrecht. It's entitled, The Possibilities of This Diverse Space. In this space, with atheists and theists, with pagans and agnostics, with humanists and theists and those who reject labels, what new understandings can emerge if we listen to one another? In this space full of varied experiences, concerns, and hopes, what new revelations may come if our hearts and minds are open? In this space where we covenant to seek the truth in love and to help one another, what new ways of life may emerge and come into being. Dear friends, welcome to this diverse community and the possibilities within it, just waiting to be born. So please join me in welcoming this new season and this song. Now, this is a hopeful song that Polly and I picked for the opening hymn. It might be a little premature, but we're going to sing it anyway. It is number 63 in the gray hymnal. It is called Spring Has Unwrapped the Flowers. Has anyone seen a daffodil yet, or a crocus or anything? Oh yeah, all right. This is not too early then. Please rise in body or spirit, and let's sing.
Good morning, I'm Laurel Whitehouse, pronouns she, her, hers. And today's story is about being interrupted by grace. It's the stories of Asande, Isabella, and John. We'll start with Reverend Dr. Asande Sasa, who became a Unitarian Universalist minister 9 years ago. So her story is current, it's still with us. And she, as a little girl, grew up in an area where the color of your skin really mattered, and hers was dark. She had a good friend whose skin was white, and when that little girl's parents found out about their friendship, they ended it right then and there, and she never saw her little friend again. She was lonely, so she went to the house of another little girl, also with white skin, who she knew was her age, and knocked on the door and asked if that girl could come out and play. And the man there, her father, the little girl's father, just slapped her right across the face and said, "Never come here again." So these kinds of hateful, hurtful, and wrong things in her life as she was growing up made her want to change how the world was, made her want to become a minister. And she worked hard. She wasn't from a wealthy family, but she managed to get educated and become a Unitarian Universalist minister 9 years ago. And she was all excited because she had her first congregation, she was preaching, things were going well, but then the congregation just didn't have the money to pay her any longer. And so she was without work, without money, and she was driving along and really questioning in her heart, is this the right path for me? She was discouraged. She was depressed. She was just uncertain of her future. And so she said, "God, please give me a sign if my path is to be a minister." And she continued to drive, and she saw a little yellow warning light pop up on her dash, and she happened to be passing a gas station, so she pulled in and asked the person who came over what that little light meant, and he said, "Oh, you just have low tire pressure." And so he had her get out of the car, and he showed her the gauge, how to check the pressure. He filled up the first tire, and she watched, and then he helped her fill up the second and the third and the fourth. And she said to him, "Thank you. What do I owe you for your help?" And he said, "Oh, I don't want any money. Just spread the word." And she realized in that moment that was her sign, Grace comes in many ways unexpected. And so she is continuing, as we speak, to work for beloved community in our faith. 500 years ago, before there was Unitarianism or Universalism, there was Queen Isabella. She had married and gone to live with her husband, the king, in Hungary. And they were happy. They had a newborn son. But just 2 weeks after that little baby was born, her husband, the king, died, leaving Queen Isabella alone with her small son, trying to protect the kingdom for him when he grew up. It was dangerous, it was hard. There were many others who thought they had the right to rule. And one of them succeeded in getting Queen Isabella sent away to Transylvania, she and her young son. And while she was there, instead of letting bitterness and hate fill her heart for the unfair things that had happened to them, she and her son, as he grew up, used to play a game called Be the Best Ruler. And they talked about the best way to be a ruler. What laws should they have? What policy should they have? What freedoms should the people have? And then their friend helped them get their kingdom back. And the very first thing, the very first law that Queen Isabella passed was religious freedom for all to worship according to their heart, which was unheard of at the time. It was the first time in the world that was a law of the land. And so, although all that trouble interrupted her life for sure, grace did come out of it. And that was the very beginning, the seeds of Unitarianism in Europe. So now we come forward a little bit, and 283 years ago, there was another minister named John Murray. And he grew up in England, and he had a Calvinist background, which is a very strict religion at the time, and believed that most people were bad, and they would have a terrible time after death, and that some people were good and would have the chance to go to heaven after death. And gradually, John began to feel that this wasn't quite right, that God loved everyone, and everyone had an equal chance of being able to go to heaven. And for these beliefs, he was thrown out of his church at the time. He lost all his friends, he lost all his money, and then his wife and small son became very sick, so he had to borrow money for their care, and he wasn't able to pay it back. So his wife and small son both died, and then he was arrested because he couldn't pay the money back. And in those moments in the cell, he said, "I will never preach again. I am done. I am just done." Now, fortunately, his brother paid his debt, so he was able to leave the jail, and he left the country. He was done with England. He sailed for America. There was a great storm that blew the ship and blew it way, way off course until it became stuck on a sandbar right off the coast of New Jersey. And they didn't have much food left, so John waded ashore to try and find some food and found a farmer named Thomas Potter. And Thomas helped him find food, and he also said to him, "I have built a church. I built a church on my farm, and I've been waiting for just the right person to come and preach there." But John said, "No, I am done with preaching. I am done. I promised God I would never preach again." And Thomas Potter said, "But I believe that that wind was the breath of God. I believe God blew the ship here, and those winds will not change until you preach." And sure enough, the wind lasted and lasted for days, until Sunday rolled around, and John finally said, "All right, I will preach." And he did, and so many people thanked him afterwards that he said, maybe my path is to be a minister. And he did continue on as a minister, and he's known as one of the founders of Universalism in America. So these people experienced great trouble and hardship in their life, but within were the seeds of grace. So now our Sikh friends and their leaders will head downstairs.
Now is the time that we often do our offering, which we will do this morning, but I want to just say that indeed we have been very blessed by the generosity of this community of late. We've had a wonderful turnout of pledges for next year's stewardship season, or this year's stewardship season to fund next year. And last night's auction and online auctions were also big successes and signs of your generosity. So as always, during the offering, the plate will be passed, and you are welcome to take this opportunity to make a contribution to First Parish. But this morning especially, and I didn't get the board's permission to do this, but I got power of the pulpit, so here we go. I'm inviting you to let the plate pass by this morning and to just take this moment listening to Polly's music and really feel the gratitude and the love and the joy that you are one of amongst many who generously donate to this congregation and allow us to be here this morning. So thank you. May the love and support continue to grow strong into the future, and may you feel the grace of this communal generosity. Take it away, Polly.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Kenny. My pronouns are she, her. Can't hear. Is that better? Okay. I'm Julia Kenny. I'm just going to take this right out. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the lay ministers in this congregation. This is a time in our service that we set aside to acknowledge the joys and sorrows that we all hold. In both our sharing and in our witness, we affirm our covenant to care for one another. This Sunday, Reverend Deborah will light a special vigil candle in recognition of the pain and suffering being experienced around the world due to ongoing war and violence. May this small act help unite us in prayer for the end to suffering. If you have a personal joy or sorrow you would like to share, please feel free to come forward now or raise your hand, and I'm happy to bring the mic to you. For those that are online, feel free to type in your chat and I'll read it out. For those joys and sorrows not spoken, may we hold in our hearts those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in silence. May it be so.
Thank you, Julia. I invite us now to turn to that time in our service where we take a little pause in our week and in our time. So as you feel comfortable, please feel free to either close your eyes or just sit in a way that feels comfortable. Maybe your eyes are glazing down just a little bit so you can pull your awareness inside. Often just becoming aware of the breath can really help pull our attentions away from the many, many things outside of us that want to draw us. So I invite us all to take a nice breath together. Deep breath in and then a long exhale out. Another deep breath in, a long exhale out. Always allowing yourself to pause at the top and the bottom of the breath to just create a little bit more space. Sometimes we can forget in the busyness of our lives that this pause is possible. And that within this pause, it's our opportunity to remind ourselves of the sacredness of life. I share this poem with you this morning from the Sufi Hafiz. It is called Now is the Time. Now is the time to know that all that you do is sacred. Now, why not consider a lasting truce with yourself and God? Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were just a child's training wheels to be laid aside when you finally live with the veracity of love. Hafiz is a divine envoy whom the Beloved has written a holy message upon. My dear, please tell me, why do you still throw sticks at your heart and God? What is it in that sweet voice inside that incites you to fear? Now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. This is the time for you to compute the impossibility that there is anything but grace. Now is the season to know that everything you do is sacred. Everything around you is grace. Taking another moment to feel the sacredness of your life, the preciousness of your life, the preciousness of time. And as you feel ready, feel free to open your eyes. That song gets me every time. Have you heard that before? Isn't it beautiful? It's a beautiful song. Thank you. So, speaking of my dad, he was a Unitarian Universalist. Oh, he didn't know it. And he never would embrace it, but in so many ways, he surely was. He was always a man of reason, and he once said that his religion was simply common sense. And he was always on the lookout and ready to point out any hypocrisy in the religions he saw around him. Does any of that sound familiar to anybody you use? I remember the day I stopped by for a visit soon after I had moved out of my childhood home. Dad was downstairs in the family room. The Sunday football game had just ended. As soon as he heard me come into the door, he called me down to join him. As I entered the basement, I could tell it was another one of those times. Dad said he had a question for me, as he sometimes did, and though he feigned confusion, he couldn't fool me. I knew he was about to make a declaration about some break in common sense that he had discovered in others. Pointing at the television screen, now tuned to the post-game activities, Dad began. "So tell me something, Deb. The football game just ended, and the reporters are in the locker rooms interviewing the players. And one reporter goes up to one of the players of the winning team, and the guy enthusiastically declares, 'I thank the grace of God for our win. God was with us.' At this, Dad pauses for dramatic effect and then asks, 'So what about the poor losers in the other locker room? Wasn't God's grace with them? What's God doing picking sides in a football game?'" I told you he was a you-you. Of course, we both knew Dad did not believe in God, let alone the idea that he could bestow grace in the form of a win on a football field. Pointing that out just brought Dad great joy. Indeed, grace is one of those words some Unitarian Universalists and many atheists may shy away from or think little about. The Latin word for grace relates back to the word meaning thankful or pleasing. But over time, it, like many other words, have become imbued with a religious meaning. The first definition offered by the Merriam-Webster dictionary clearly reflects the traditional Christian meaning of grace, calling it unmerited divine assistance given humans for their regeneration and sanctification. Now, personally, I have many questions about that definition. I mean, if grace is so to regenerate and sanctify us humans, why not give it out more freely? Why does it appear that grace only goes out to some, often the game winners? Perhaps God has a limited supply of grace to be handed out each day, or maybe he just gets tired after a while. Remember that scene in Bruce Almighty? Do you remember this movie? When Bruce, having discovered he was now the Almighty, tries to say yes to every prayer that comes in, and chaos ensues. And God, i.e. Morgan Freeman, tells Bruce his job is just so much harder than it looks. Of course, there was a time prior to the Protestant Reformation when some church leaders got the brilliant idea to be brokers for God's grace and to fund a new building. They called them indulgences, and one could buy what was in essence a get-out-of-hell free card for themselves or a friend who they feared was suffering in purgatory or even worse. Now, the cards were definitely not free. Turns out the road to heaven was short if you had a little spare cash. Barb Hefner, I hope you're taking notes for next year's auction. Unfortunately, for the needed building repairs, Martin Luther came along in 1517 and ruined it all by teaching that grace could not be bought. It was instead freely given by God to the most deserving and to the most undeserving alike, just as rain falls both on the just and the unjust, it was said. Now, I do think Luther was onto something, but it still leaves me feeling like grace is considered by some on par with a lottery ticket. Maybe you'll win, and maybe you won't. If something good happens, you won. It was God's grace. If something not so good happens, well, that's on you. Don't blame the Almighty. He was having a busy day. Indeed, I will admit one of my least favorite phrases is the one that goes, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Now, I get that it's supposed to connote a sense that we're all equal, with equal chance of bad things arriving at our door, but to me, when I hear people use that phrase, it often sounds more like, "Whew, glad I'm not them. That looks rough. Someone must really like me." I say this not to bash the idea of grace, and on the contrary, and I'm getting to the point of the sermon, I love and cherish the idea and the experience of grace. I just have a need to reclaim it away from some of the current uses of the word. I want to reclaim it for us Unitarian Universalists because unlike the football player who would recognize grace in his winning or the person grateful for skirting a tragedy, I think there is something potentially liberating and important about recognizing how grace occupies our lives unencumbered by the whims of a deity. And I think that as Unitarian Universalists, the recognition of grace can be a vital part of our open and diverse religion. 19th century American psychologist and philosopher William James once wrote, "All religions and spiritual traditions begin with the cry, 'Help.'" And I think that's a fair assessment. After all, despite our intellect and our great determination, I think we would all agree that a great deal of life is out of our control. Our physical characteristics, the families we have, the opportunities that show up for us, the disease and hardship that seem to arrive fully uninvited at our doorsteps, are not necessarily things we have control over. And probably far more often than we capable people care to confess, we too find ourselves silently, or sometimes not so silently, calling out, "Help." For thousands of years, religions of all kinds have been trying to answer that cry. They offer us rituals, stories of miracles, the possibility of helpful deities and saints and spirits. And most offer some promise that one day we will be relieved of our suffering, whether in heaven or nirvana, or just because we've turned into compost. And they have offered us the possibility of being the recipient of an unmerited boon. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of the lottery. I just don't like my chances. And so I like to think of grace a little differently. Novelist Anne Lamott offers a beautiful explanation of grace that I've carried with me for years since I first heard it. She says, "I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us." Isn't that beautiful? Grace meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. I'm pretty sure we have all had those experiences when we were on a path with a silent cry of help in our hearts, and then somehow we were plucked from where we were and set on a new course. One of my own profound moments of this plucking happened when I was 19 years old and found myself in the middle of a very dark place. I had been in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship that had started in high school and extended into my first semester of college, a semester I would not complete because of the emotional grip the relationship had on me. For as long as I can remember being in that relationship, I was trying to get out of that relationship. But no matter how hard I tried, it seemed like I would return again and again with the hope that he would be different. And with the assumption that I must have done something wrong, and that if I could just fix that, things would be better. Indeed, I was silently and desperately calling out help. Soon I found myself as a college dropout in an abusive relationship, searching for a job. On a whim, I applied for a position as a membership salesperson at a health club. That's what we called gyms back then, remember? On the morning of my interview, I was far from ready. My boyfriend and I had been out all night long, and I'm sure I did not look like the picture of health. But something told me to go to the interview anyway, and I did. And to my surprise, the next day I received a call. I had gotten the job. The health club was owned by a young couple, Michael and Mary Ann Fitzgerald. It turned out that not only were they into working out, but they were also passionate about healthy food. And one day they invited me into their office and started telling me about the power of food and how it can impact our lives. And I listened with enough curiosity that they decided to offer to cook for me to help me get started in a diet change. Each day they would make extra brown rice and seaweed and vegetables and bring me lunch. And they gave me a list of what I should and shouldn't eat, and I committed 100% to their instructions and gratefully received their cooking. And then a curious thing happened. 2 weeks, and I kid you not, 2 weeks after I changed my diet, not only was I able to walk away from that abusive relationship which had lasted for 2 years, but I was able to stay away for good. That shift set me on a new path in life. It ushered in my career as a natural food chef, which took me to yoga, which eventually brought me to Unitarian Universalism. Now, the topic of the power of food in one's diet is a topic for a whole other sermon, but looking back on those events from the vantage point I have now, I've come to see the true power of that moment was not just in the miso soup and seaweed, but in the simple act of grace given to me by Michael and Mary Ann. Now, calling it luck or coincidence or even just kindness doesn't cut it for me. It doesn't seem to do it justice to the magnitude of what happened. So I've decided to claim the word grace for it, because I want a special word that reminds me how profound and special those acts of kindness really are. That moment in my life where I was going down one pathway and was interrupted by something that put me somewhere else, it was not the last time that it has happened in my life. And I imagine sitting here today, there are stories in your own head, remembering when the same has happened for you. Anne Lamott has said, grace is spiritual WD-40. It helps us when we are all gummed up and stuck. Unlike a lottery ticket where the winnings are clear, grace's impacts are often beyond what we will ever know. I think often of an unhoused man I met on the streets of Berkeley, California, where I went to seminary. There are many people who live on the streets there and in the parks, and I would pass by them each morning on my walk from where I was staying to the class. One morning there was a man sitting on the sidewalk who caught my eye. I assumed he was looking for cash, and since I didn't have any on me that day, without him even saying a word, I turned to him and said, "Sorry, I don't have any cash," and figured I could hurry on my way. To my surprise, he said, "That's okay, but do you have time?" For a moment, I thought perhaps he was asking for the time of day, but then I realized what he was really asking for. I was about to say that I didn't have time to stop because it would make me late to class, but then I paused. Something about his eyes and the irony that I was going to class to learn how to be a minister made me reconsider. Absolutely, I said. I'm Deb. What's your name? And I sat with him and we launched into a nice, leisurely conversation. Now, I actually don't remember what we talked about, but I do very much remember what he said when I was leaving. It stuck with me. He said, you know, those of us on the street don't just need money. Thanks for giving me your time. I do not know the totality of what that person was experiencing in life, and I do not assume that our little talk set him on a new path. But by the way he thanked me, I am quite sure that my small act of kindness meant something to him. Sometimes human-to-human connection is the only grace we need, and it's the only grace we can give. It's too easy to look at another's plight and think, there, but for the grace of God go I. But maybe that is not the Unitarian Universalist way to say it. Maybe here in this faith we can reclaim our own ability to be each other's grace. And maybe here we will instead look at each other's difficulties and say, there is where my grace needs to go. Comedian Pete Holmes once reflected that you could probably walk up to a person on the street and whisper in their ear, "You coward," and they would think, "How did you know?" And I think there's other words we could whisper as well. "You're scared. How did you know? You think you're unlovable. How did you know? You are crying out for help. How did you know?" Maybe knowing that about each other, remembering that about each other, will help us all be a little bit more open and willing. Maybe knowing that about each other, remembering that about each other, will help us see that grace is not something we have to wait for. It's not something handed out to the lucky. Maybe when we learn to hear the cry of each other, we will remember how little of us it really takes to be the grace that saves souls and lives, even if it is just for a moment. We say that someone is bodily graceful because there is a lack of resistance in their movements. And I know in my heart that each of us has the capacity to be graceful, if not in body, then surely and completely in spirit. Grace is when we find each other where we are at, and we are open and willing to not leave each other there. Yes, I am open and I am willing, and I know you are too. May we all be reminded often how better our worlds are when we allow them to be interrupted by grace. I'm going to invite you now into a moment of quiet reflection, quiet musical reflection. Take a moment to yourself. Thank you for your openness and willingness to be in community together this morning. Let's extinguish our chalice and we'll sing our final hymn. The words are in the order of service if you'd like to join me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. I invite you to rise in body or spirit now for our closing hymn. We're going to sing Amazing Grace. Make any adjustments in the words you like. We're going to sing version 205. Please rise in body or spirit. I will end with Anne Lamott again. If she is an author that you do not know, I encourage you're looking her up. She says, grace is the love that goes before and that greets us on the way. It's the help you receive when you have no bright ideas left, when you are empty and desperate and have discovered that your best thinking and most charming charm has failed you. Grace is the light or the electricity or juice or breeze that takes you from that isolated place and puts you with others who are as startled and embarrassed and eventually grateful as you are to be there. May our lives bring us much grace, and may you recognize the grace that is standing right beside you, right here in this room, and everywhere you go in life. And may you spread that grace to each other. Amen. Blessing.